The Xantharian Empire had existed for 3 millennia, spread across 47 star systems, and prided itself on rational thought and scientific progress. Its citizens functioned within a vast bureaucratic culture that valued data collection above all else. Knowledge was power, and the Xantharians possessed the most extensive digital archives in the known universe. Omega-7 was one of their more remote research stations, orbiting a young star at the edge of Xantharian territory. Its primary function was to observe species not yet evolved enough for light travel, a phrase that made Lydia Vex smirk every time she heard it. The Xantharians categorized knowledge like housewives organized spices, with a peculiar blend of precision and arbitrary values. Her species, humans, fell somewhere between promising and concerning, depending on which Xantharian scholar you consulted. Dr. Lydia Vex had arrived at Omega-7 6 months ago as part of a 2-year exchange program. As the first human xenobiologist allowed to work alongside Xantharian researchers, she represented Earth's scientific community with stubborn determination and unwavering compassion, traits her hosts found simultaneously fascinating and troubling. "The human consumes caffeine again," noted observer KFT-9, watching Lydia through the station's omnipresent monitoring system. "Precisely at 700 hours, as always." "Note the ritualistic aspects," replied observer Vex-12, who, despite sharing a surname designation with Lydia, purely coincidental in the Xantharian cataloging system, could not have been more different from her. "She speaks to the brewing apparatus as if it possessed consciousness." Indeed. Lydia was mumbling to her coffee maker, a habit she'd developed during long, solitary research missions. "Come on, you temperamental beast. Just a few more drops." The observers recorded this interaction with the same methodical attention they gave to everything the human did. To them, Lydia was as much a research subject as she was a colleague. Human behavioral patterns suggest comfort in anthropomorphizing inanimate objects. Vex-12 continued, "A curious evolutionary adaptation to isolation." What the observers couldn't quantify was Lydia's growing frustration with being treated like a specimen in a petri dish. She had come here to study alien biology, not to become the subject of Xantharian behavioral analysis, but she endured their clinical gaze for the sake of science and diplomacy. The incident that would change everything occurred during Lydia's routine exploration of Omega-7's exterior hull. The station maintained a series of specialized containment chambers for studying space-borne microorganisms. Lydia had authorization to collect samples for her research on extremophiles, organisms that thrived in the harshest environments. While inspecting Collection Chamber 12, she noticed an anomaly. A dark, fluid-like substance pulsated in the corner, partially hidden behind a ventilation duct. According to protocol, she should immediately report any unidentified organism to the station's security team. Instead, Lydia moved closer. The substance shifted as she approached, revealing what appeared to be a wounded creature. Its body resembled liquid obsidian, constantly flowing and reforming. Through her helmet's enhanced vision, she detected what might have been injuries, ruptures in its molecular cohesion that leaked a luminescent blue substance. "You're hurt," she whispered, more to herself than to the creature. To her astonishment, the creature's form stabilized momentarily, as if responding to her voice. Its surface rippled in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Lydia made a decision that would eventually reverberate across the Xantharian Empire. Instead of reporting the creature, she carefully collected it in a specialized containment unit and smuggled it back to her private laboratory. The Xantharian observers watched this unauthorized collection with growing concern. "The human has violated Protocol 347B, stated KFT-9. "Unknown specimens must be processed through central quarantine." "Curious," replied Vex 12. She appears to be exhibiting protective behavior toward the organism, perhaps a maternal instinct misfiring in response to perceived vulnerability. Should we intervene? Asked a third observer. Sex 3. Not yet, decided Vex 12. This presents a valuable opportunity to study human ethical prioritization in conflict situations. Continue observation at highest resolution. In her lab, Lydia worked feverishly to stabilize the creature. Her scans revealed a complex molecular structure unlike anything in Earth's biological catalog. The creature appeared to be absorbing energy directly from the ambient light, using it to repair its damaged tissue. You're quite the marvel, aren't you? Lydia murmured, as she adjusted the lab's illumination to provide more energy. I think I'll call you Shadow, fitting for a being made of darkness, don't you think? The creature, Shadow, responded by forming a tendril that reached toward her hand. Instinctively, Lydia pulled back. Not so fast. We need to establish some boundaries first. Over the next few weeks, Lydia devoted herself to Shadow's recovery. She discovered that the creature thrived on a diet of various energy sources, light, heat, and even the electrical output from small devices. Whenever she entered the lab, Shadow would pulse in patterns that seemed increasingly deliberate, almost like a greeting. The Xantharian observers documented every interaction with clinical precision while debating the implications among themselves. The human continues to form an emotional attachment to specimen XB7, noted KFT9, using the official designation they had assigned to Shadow. She speaks to it as one would address a companion animal. The specimen appears to be responding to these emotional cues, added Vex 12. Note the synchronized pulses when the human enters the laboratory. This suggests either mimicry or actual communication. Humans are excessively emotional, commented Sex 3. This is precisely why they remain confined to their solar system while we traverse the stars. Emotional decision-making impedes scientific progress. Yet they have achieved remarkable technological advancement in a relatively short evolutionary timeframe, countered Vex 12. Perhaps there is adaptive value to their emotional processing that we have yet to quantify. This sparked a heated debate among Xantharian scholars across multiple star systems. Some argued that human emotional responses represented a primitive evolutionary stage that would eventually be outgrown. Others proposed that emotions might serve as an alternative form of information processing, less precise, but potentially more adaptable in certain contexts. Meanwhile, Lydia remained unaware of the philosophical storm brewing around her interactions with Shadow. She had begun to document the creature's remarkable abilities. Shadow could alter its molecular density at will, becoming almost gaseous or hardening to a state resembling polished stone. It could extend tendrils with incredible precision, manipulating small objects around the lab. Most intriguingly, Shadow seemed to be learning. It observed Lydia's actions and began to mimic them in simplified ways. When she input commands on her computer terminal, Shadow would later extend tendrils to touch the same keys in the same sequence. You're not just mimicking, are you? Lydia asked one evening, after Shadow had correctly replicated a complex sequence of commands. You're understanding. Shadow pulsed in what Lydia had come to interpret as affirmation. The emotional bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. Lydia found herself rushing through her other duties to spend more time with Shadow. She began to smuggle in additional equipment, sensors, small computing devices, even educational modules designed for children, to test Shadow's cognitive abilities. The Xantharian observers grew increasingly concerned. The human's attachment to specimen XB7 has progressed beyond acceptable parameters, declared KFT9. Her scientific objectivity has been compromised. More concerning, is the specimen's accelerated cognitive development, added Sachs 3. Its learning curve exceeds our predictive models. We have insufficient data on its species to determine potential risks. I recommend separation, stated Vex 12. The human should be reassigned to another research station. Specimen XB7 should be transferred to central analysis on Zenthar Prime. The decision moved up through the Zentharian bureaucracy with unusual speed. 3 days later, Lydia received notification of her immediate transfer to Research Station Beta 12. "This is ridiculous," she protested to the station's administrator, a tall, spindly Zentharian named Zex Prime. "My research here is just beginning to yield results. I can't leave now." The decision has been finalized at the highest levels. Zex Prime responded with characteristic Zentharian detachment. "Your transport departs in 14 hours. Please prepare your personal effects." "And what about my research subjects?" Lydia demanded, careful not to specifically mention Shadow. "All research materials will be properly cataloged and either stored or transferred to appropriate facilities." Lydia knew what this meant. Shadow would be taken to some sterile Zentharian laboratory, treated as nothing more than a curious specimen to be dissected and analyzed. The thought made her stomach churn. That night, she returned to her lab with determination burning in her eyes. "They want to separate us," she told Shadow, who hovered near the ceiling of its containment unit. "But I won't let them take you." Shadow descended slowly until it was level with Lydia's face. It extended a tendril that pressed gently against the transparent barrier between them. Lydia had spent weeks studying Shadow's molecular structure. She had discovered that the creature could pass through certain materials if it altered its density precisely. The containment unit was specifically designed to prevent this, using a complex electromagnetic field to maintain its integrity. "I'm going to turn off the field," Lydia explained, though she wasn't certain how much Shadow understood. "But you have to stay close to me, understand? No wandering off." Shadow pulsed in what she hoped was agreement. When Lydia deactivated the electromagnetic field, Shadow slipped through the barrier like ink through water. It hovered before her momentarily, then wrapped itself around her wrist like a liquid bracelet. "Good," Lydia whispered. "Now we need to move quickly." Her plan was desperate and probably foolish, to reach the station's shuttle bay, borrow a research vessel, and escape to the nearby planetary system where she had contacts among the indigenous population. It wasn't freedom, exactly, but it would buy them time while she figured out a more permanent solution. What Lydia didn't know was that her lab had been placed under enhanced surveillance the moment the transfer order was issued. Alarms blared throughout Omega-7 as soon as Shadow's containment unit registered as empty. "Security breach in Laboratory Section 4, announced the station's automated system. "Unknown organism released. All personnel initiate lockdown procedures." Lydia raced through the corridors, Shadow clinging to her arm. They had almost reached the shuttle bay when a security barrier slammed down before them, cutting off their escape route. "Dr. Lydia Vex," came Zex Prime's voice over the communication system. "Return the specimen to containment immediately. This is your only warning." Lydia looked at Shadow, who had extended a small tendril toward her face in what seemed almost like a comforting gesture. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I tried." What happened next would be debated by Zentharian scholars for centuries to come. Shadow suddenly expanded, its form growing to envelop Lydia completely. Security footage showed the human disappearing inside the dark mass, which then flowed through a ventilation shaft too small for any humanoid to pass through. Station-wide scans failed to locate either Lydia or Shadow for 17 hours. When they were finally discovered, they were in a remote maintenance bay near the station's outer hull. Shadow had returned to its bracelet-like form around Lydia's wrist, and the human appeared unharmed, if exhausted. "What did it do to you?" demanded Zex Prime as security personnel surrounded them. Lydia's eyes held a strange light. "Shadow protected me and showed me things. Incredible things." Before she could elaborate, medical personnel sedated her. Shadow was captured using a specialized containment field and transferred to a high-security holding cell. The incident was classified at the highest level, and reports were sent directly to Zenthar Prime, the heart of the Empire. What the Zentharians didn't realize was that their classification systems, their reports, their very data networks had been compromised. During those 17 missing hours, Shadow had connected with Omega-7's central computer through Lydia's access codes. It had absorbed information, terabytes of data about Zentharian history, technology, biology, and star charts. Most importantly, it had learned what it truly was. 3 days later, as Lydia recovered in the station's medical bay, the highest authorities in the Zentharian Empire made a startling discovery. Advanced scans of Shadow's molecular structure, compared against the Empire's ancient biological records, produced a match that sent waves of panic through the ruling council. Shadow was a void stalker, a legendary predator species believed to have gone extinct millennia ago. According to historical records, void stalkers were apex predators, capable of traveling through space without ships, hunting across star systems with terrifying intelligence. They had been hunted to extinction by the combined forces of multiple civilizations after they decimated entire planets, or so everyone had believed. Emergency protocols were immediately activated. Omega-7 received direct orders from Zenthar Prime. Lydia Vex was to be evacuated immediately to a secure facility. Shadow, now classified as Specimen VS-1, was to be contained using the most advanced technology available and transported to a military research installation. When security personnel entered Lydia's room to prepare her for evacuation, they found her sitting calmly on her bed, staring at the wall with unusual intensity. "It's time to go. Dr. Vex," announced the security chief. "We have a transport waiting." "Where are you taking Shadow?" she asked without looking at them. "That information is classified. Please prepare for immediate departure." Lydia turned to face them, her expression unreadable. "You're afraid of it. You should be. But not for the reasons you think." Before they could respond, the station's lights flickered. The security team's communication devices emitted bursts of static. "What's happening?" demanded the security chief. The answer came in the form of a station-wide alert. "Containment breach in High Security Cell 1. All personnel initiate emergency protocols." Shadow had escaped. The evacuation of Lydia proceeded with frantic urgency. She offered no resistance as they rushed her to a waiting transport vessel. As the ship pulled away from Omega-7, Lydia watched through a viewport as the station's emergency lights pulsed in patterns of red and amber. "It won't help," she said softly to no one in particular. "Those lights are just beacons to Shadow, like lighthouses guiding it home." The transport accelerated to light speed, carrying Lydia toward Zenthar Prime, the heavily fortified capital world of the Empire. Behind them, chaos enveloped Omega-7. Shadow moved through the station like a living nightmare. It had grown considerably since its rescue by Lydia, feeding on the station's power systems and information networks. Now, it flowed through corridors and ventilation systems, absorbing or destroying everything in its path. The Zentharian security forces deployed increasingly desperate measures. Energy weapons proved useless. Shadow simply absorbed the blasts and grew stronger. Physical barriers were navigated with ease, as the creature altered its density to pass through solid matter. Even the station's most sophisticated containment fields barely slowed its progress. Most disturbing to the Zentharians was the methodical nature of Shadow's rampage. It wasn't attacking randomly. It targeted communication systems, weapons caches, and data nodes with precise efficiency. It was systematically dismantling the station's defenses while gathering information. "It's displaying tactical intelligence," reported the security chief to Zenthar Prime. "This isn't mindless destruction. It's executing a strategic—" The transmission ended abruptly. A shadow engulfed the communication center. The last images received by Zenthar Prime showed the creature forming what appeared to be a humanoid shape before the feed went dark. By the time reinforcements arrived, Omega-7 was a derelict shell. Life support systems remained functional, but every information system had been wiped clean. The station's personnel were found alive, but in a state of profound shock, unable to coherently describe what had happened. Shadow itself had vanished without a trace. The incident was classified at the highest level. Official reports stated that Omega-7 had experienced a catastrophic system failure requiring evacuation and extensive repairs. The truth was known only to the highest echelons of Zentharian leadership, and they were terrified. For the first time in centuries, the Supreme Coordinator of the Zentharian Empire called an emergency session of the High Council. The ancient chamber on Zenthar Prime, with its soaring crystalline dome and circular arrangement of seats, had not hosted such a gathering since the Nebula conflict 300 years earlier. "We face an unprecedented threat," the Supreme Coordinator announced to the assembled counselors. "A void stalker has awakened, and it appears to have formed a bond with the human xenobiologist, Dr. Lydia Vex." Murmurs of alarm spread through the chamber. The counselors had all reviewed the data from Omega-7, had all seen the creature's capabilities. "Where is the human now?" asked Counselor Zex-7, her voice sharp with anxiety. "Dr. Vex is being held in a secure facility beneath this very complex," replied the Supreme Coordinator. "She is comfortable but isolated. All communication systems have been removed from her quarters." "And the Void Stalker?" "Unknown. Our long-range sensors detected no sign of it leaving the Omega system, but its ability to mask its presence makes tracking nearly impossible." "What does it want?" This question came from Counselor Bex-3, the oldest member of the High Council. The Supreme Coordinator's expression darkened. "Based on the creature's behavior and historical records of Void Stalker psychology, our analysts believe it wants Dr. Vex." "Why, as food?" "No. The Void Stalker could have consumed her at any point during their time together. Instead, it formed what appears to be a symbiotic relationship. It protected her during their attempted escape. Our xenopsychologists believe it is imprinted on her, perhaps the way young predators imprint on parental figures." "That's impossible," objected another counselor. "Void stalkers are solitary apex predators. They don't form attachments." "Perhaps our understanding of Void Stalker psychology was incomplete," suggested the Supreme Coordinator. "Or perhaps this is a mutation, an aberration. Regardless, we must prepare for the possibility that it will attempt to reach Dr. Vex. Zenthar Prime has the most sophisticated defense systems in the Empire." Counselor Zex-7 reminded everyone. "No single organism could penetrate them." "I hope you are correct, Counselor. Nevertheless, I have ordered our military to highest alert status. Every approach to Zenthar Prime is being monitored. We will not be caught unprepared." In her luxurious prison beneath the council chambers, Lydia Vex sat cross-legged on a plush carpet, eyes closed in meditation. Her accommodations were comfortable, a spacious apartment with sleeping quarters, a living area, even a small garden space with exotic plants from across the Empire. Everything except communications technology or anything that might be used as a weapon. She opened her eyes and smiled slightly. "They really don't understand you at all, do they?" "Shadow," she whispered to the empty room, "on the far edges of Zentharian territory. At Research Station Beta 12, an astrophysicist named KTX-4 noticed an unusual reading on her instruments. A small gravitational anomaly, barely within detection parameters, moving through the system at sublight speed. She filed a routine report and thought nothing more of it. 3 days later, Beta 12 went dark. When investigators arrived, they found a scene identical to Omega 7, systems intact but wiped of all data, personnel alive but traumatized, and no sign of what had caused the damage. 2 weeks after that, Research Station Beta 14 suffered the same fate. Then Military Outpost Gamma 7. Then the communications hub at Delta Prime. A pattern emerged. Each attack brought the mysterious entity closer to Zenthar Prime. Each targeted facility was left intact, but stripped of information. No lives were taken, but the psychological impact on survivors was devastating. They spoke of darkness that moved with purpose, of a void that hungered not for flesh, but for knowledge. The Zentharian Empire, for the first time in its 3,000-year history, knew fear. On Zenthar Prime, Lydia followed these developments through the carefully sanitized news reports her captors allowed her to access. They thought they were controlling her information, but Lydia had spent enough time with Shadow to understand its methods. The pattern of attacks, the systems targeted, the progression toward Zenthar Prime. Shadow was coming for her, gathering intelligence as it came. The realization filled her with conflicting emotions. On one hand, she felt responsible for unleashing this force upon the Zentharian Empire. Shadow was systematically dismantling their information networks, causing incalculable disruption to a civilization built on data. On the other hand, she couldn't help but feel a surge of pride at Shadow's intelligence and determination. During their brief time together, she had recognized something in Shadow that the Zentharians couldn't comprehend, an emotional intelligence that transcended species boundaries. Shadow wasn't just a predator, it was a sentient being capable of attachment, loyalty, and perhaps even love. The Zentharians had dismissed her emotional bond with Shadow as a human weakness, a failure of scientific objectivity. They couldn't understand that emotions weren't a weakness, but a different kind of strength, a different way of processing and responding to the world. 6 months after Lydia's arrival on Zenthar Prime, as Shadow's methodical advance continued to terrify the Empire, she was summoned to meet with the Supreme Coordinator himself. Security protocols of unprecedented stringency surrounded the meeting. Lydia was scanned for hidden technology, dressed in specially designed clothing that would supposedly prevent any form of communication with external entities, and transported to the meeting location via a circuitous route designed to confuse any potential observers. The Supreme Coordinator waited in a small, austere room deep within the government complex. He was older than Lydia had expected, with skin that had the translucent quality common to ancient Zentharians. Dr. Lydia Vex, he began without preamble. Do you understand what you have done? Lydia met his gaze calmly. I saved a wounded being that needed help. What have you done, Supreme Coordinator? The Zentharian leader's eyes narrowed. We have protected our civilization from a predator that once devastated entire worlds. The Void Stalkers were not misunderstood creatures. Dr. Vex, they were intelligent. Ruthless killers that fed on energy and information. Shadow has killed no one during its journey here, Lydia pointed out. Yet it has crippled our research facilities, compromised our military installations, and created a level of fear among our population not experienced in generations. The Supreme Coordinator leaned forward. Why is it coming here, Dr. Vex? What does it want? Lydia smiled slightly. Me. It wants me. Why? Because I showed it kindness when it was vulnerable. Because I recognized its intelligence and sentience when your observers saw only a specimen to be studied. Because we formed a bond that transcends your understanding of interspecies relationships. The Supreme Coordinator's expression remained impassive, but Lydia sensed his discomfort. Xantharian culture had evolved to suppress emotional responses, considering them primitive and inefficient. The idea that an emotional bond could motivate such determination and ingenuity from a void stalker challenged their fundamental understanding of the universe. "If what you say is true," he said after a long pause, "then perhaps we can use this bond to our advantage. Would you be willing to communicate with the creature? To tell it to cease its attacks?" Lydia laughed softly. "You still don't understand. Shadow isn't attacking your empire out of malice. It's looking for me, and your defenses are obstacles in its path. If you want the attacks to stop, release me." "That is not possible. The security of the empire will continue to be compromised as long as you keep us apart." Lydia interrupted. "Shadow won't stop. It can't be contained, can't be destroyed, and won't be deterred. Your only option is cooperation." The Supreme Coordinator studied her face, searching for deception or manipulation. Finding none, he sighed, a remarkably human gesture that surprised Lydia. "What do you propose?" "Let me go. Provide me with a research vessel equipped for deep space exploration. Shadow and I will leave Xantharian space and trouble you no more." "You ask us to release a void stalker back into the galaxy? The risk is unacceptable." "The risk of keeping us separated is greater," Lydia countered. "Shadow's attacks have been restrained so far. Systems disabled, but not destroyed. Personnel traumatized, but not harmed. What happens when its patience runs out? When it decides that finding me requires more decisive action?" The threat hung in the air between them. Both knew it wasn't idle. Historical records documented Void Stalker's capacity for destruction when provoked. "I will consult with the High Council," the Supreme Coordinator finally said, "but I make no promises." Lydia was returned to her quarters, where she resumed her patient waiting. She knew Shadow was close now. She could feel it somehow, a pressure at the edges of her consciousness, like the approach of a distant storm. 3 days later, alarms blared throughout Xanthar Prime. The planet's outermost defense grid had detected an anomaly, a shadow moving against the stars, absorbing the light around it as it descended toward the capital city. The Xantharian military mobilized with impressive speed. Energy cannons tracked the approaching entity. Containment fields sprang to life, creating layered barriers around the government complex. Elite security teams took up positions at every possible entry point. In the command center, the Supreme Coordinator watched grim-faced as tactical displays showed the Void Stalker's approach. "Time to intercept?" he asked. 4 minutes until it reaches the outer defense grid," replied the military commander. "Our weapons are locked and ready." "Will they stop it?" The commander hesitated before answering. "Unknown. Supreme Coordinator. Our historical records indicate that Void Stalkers can absorb enormous amounts of energy. We may simply be providing it with sustenance." On the displays, the shadow continued its inexorable approach. It moved with purpose, not bothering to conceal itself now. This was no longer infiltration but declaration, a predator announcing its presence, challenging any who would stand between it and its goal. "Evacuate the civilian population from the Central District," ordered the Supreme Coordinator, "and bring Dr. Vex to the command center." When Lydia arrived, escorted by 4 heavily armed guards, her eyes immediately fixed on the tactical displays. A smile touched her lips as she watched Shadow's approach. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said softly. "Such single-minded determination." "It is a threat to our civilization," the Supreme Coordinator replied. A predator of unparalleled danger. Only because you made it one, Lydia countered. You separated us. You treated a sentient being as a specimen, a threat to be contained, rather than a consciousness to be understood. Before the Supreme Coordinator could respond, the command center erupted into chaos. The outer defense grid had engaged the approaching shadow, energy weapons firing in synchronized patterns designed to trap and contain any invasive entity. Shadow absorbed the blasts without slowing. If anything, it seemed to grow stronger, its form expanding as it consumed the energy directed against it. It tore through the first containment field as if it were gossamer, then the second, then the third. Impossible, whispered the military commander. Those fields could contain a stellar flare. Layer after layer of Xantharian defenses, the most sophisticated protection systems in the known galaxy, proved useless against Shadow's advance. It wasn't just that the Void Stalker was powerful, it was that it seemed to know exactly where to strike, which systems to target, how to bypass supposedly impenetrable security measures. It learned from every facility it visited, Lydia explained, watching the futile defensive efforts with a mixture of awe and sadness. Each attack taught it more about your technology, your strategies, your weaknesses. It's been preparing for this moment for months. The Supreme Coordinator turned to her, his composure finally cracking. Stop it. You claim to have a bond with this creature. Use it. Tell it to cease its attack. Lydia shook her head. I can't stop it any more than you can stop a supernova, but I can redirect it. She gestured to the displays. It's not attacking randomly. It's creating a path, straight to me. Give me what we discussed, and I promise we'll leave peacefully. For a moment, the Supreme Coordinator seemed ready to refuse. Then a new alarm sounded. Shadow had breached the central security grid. It was inside the government complex itself. Prepare a research vessel as Dr. Vex requested, he ordered, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. Full long-range capabilities, sufficient supplies for extended exploration. Supreme Coordinator, with respect, began the military commander. Do it now. The Supreme Coordinator rarely raised his voice. The sharp command shocked everyone in the command center into silence. We have no choice. As the orders were relayed, Lydia closed her eyes and reached out with her mind. She couldn't truly communicate with Shadow telepathically. Their nervous systems were too different. But during their brief time together, they had developed something like an emotional resonance. She projected calm, patience, and anticipation. Somewhere deep in the complex, Shadow paused in its advance. Security cameras showed the Void Stalker hovering in a corridor, its form rippling with patterns that seemed almost thoughtful. It's responding to you, the Supreme Coordinator observed with reluctant fascination. It always has, Lydia replied simply. The next 20 minutes passed in tense preparation. The research vessel was made ready, positioned on a landing pad adjacent to the government complex. Security forces established a controlled corridor through which Lydia would be escorted to the vessel. When everything was prepared, Lydia turned to the Supreme Coordinator. I need to meet Shadow alone. Your security forces should maintain distance. That is not acceptable. The risk is necessary, Lydia interrupted firmly. Shadow won't approach if it perceives a threat to me. Your security forces will only provoke it. After a brief but intense debate, a compromise was reached. Lydia would meet Shadow in a large atrium near the landing pad. Security forces would withdraw to a perimeter 50 meters distant, weapons powered down but ready. As Lydia walked alone into the atrium, its transparent ceiling revealing the star-filled sky above Xanthar Prime, she felt a profound sense of rightness. Whatever happened next, she was following a path that felt destined. "Shadow," she called softly. "I'm here." The response was immediate. A darkness flowed into the atrium from multiple directions simultaneously, through ventilation systems, along power conduits, even seeping through the molecular bonds of the supposedly impenetrable walls. It coalesced before her, larger than she remembered, its form shifting between abstract patterns and vaguely humanoid shapes. "Hello, old friend," Lydia said, smiling. "You've been busy." Shadow extended a tendril toward her face, stopping just short of touching her skin. Its surface rippled with complex patterns that Lydia had learned to interpret as communication. "I know," she responded, as if Shadow had spoken. "I've missed you too." From the security perimeter, the Xantharians watched in stunned silence as human and Void Stalker communicated through an incomprehensible mixture of words, gestures, and shifting patterns. To them, it seemed like witnessing the impossible, a conversation between prey and predator, conducted with the ease of old friends reuniting. "What is happening?" the Supreme Coordinator asked the xenopsychologist who had been summoned to observe. "I cannot say with certainty," admitted the scientist. "But it appears that Dr. Vex was correct about their bond. The Void Stalker is displaying behavior completely inconsistent with historical records. It's almost gentle with her." In the atrium, Lydia had placed her hand against Shadow's surface. The Void Stalker had solidified slightly at the point of contact, creating something like a handshake. "They've given us a ship," she told Shadow. "We can leave, explore the galaxy together. No more cages, no more observation. Just discovery." Shadow's form undulated in what Lydia recognized as excitement. A pattern rippled across its surface that she had come to associate with questioning. "Yes, we're going now. They're very eager to see us leave," Lydia laughed softly. Together, they walked toward the landing pad where the research vessel waited. Security forces maintained their distance, weapons still lowered, but grips tightening as the Void Stalker passed. The Supreme Coordinator met them at the vessel's boarding ramp. His composure had returned, but Lydia could see the tension in his posture, the way his eyes never left Shadow's flowing form. "The vessel is fully equipped as requested," he stated formally. "Star charts, supplies, research equipment, everything you need for extended exploration." "Thank you," Lydia replied with equal formality. "The Xantharian Empire has been most educational. Before you depart, I must ask, what will you do now? Where will you go?" Lydia glanced at Shadow, who hovered beside her like a living cloak. "We'll explore. There's so much of the galaxy neither of us has seen. So many questions to answer." "What questions?" The Supreme Coordinator couldn't quite hide his scientific curiosity, even in this tense moment. "The same ones your empire has pursued for millennia," Lydia replied. "But perhaps with different methods. You seek knowledge through observation and categorization. We'll seek it through engagement and connection." Shadow pulsed in what seemed like agreement, extending tendrils that wove complex patterns in the air. "One final question. Dr. Vex," said the Supreme Coordinator. "The Void Stalker, Shadow, as you call it, is the last of its kind, as far as we know. What will happen when it eventually dies? Will all knowledge of its species be lost?" Lydia smiled mysteriously. "Who says it's the last? The universe is vast, and your empire, for all its achievements, has explored only a tiny fraction of it. Perhaps there are others out there, waiting to be found. Perhaps Shadow and I will find them." This possibility seemed to disturb the Supreme Coordinator deeply. "If you do, I trust you will not direct them toward Xantharian space. That depends entirely on how the Xantharian Empire evolves in our absence." Lydia replied. Perhaps this experience will teach your people something about the limitations of knowledge without understanding, of observation without connection. Without waiting for a response, Lydia turned and ascended the boarding ramp. Shadow flowed alongside her, its form shifting excitedly as they entered the vessel. The Supreme Coordinator and his security detail retreated to a safe distance as the research vessel's engines ignited. Within minutes, the ship had risen through Zenthar Prime's atmosphere and disappeared into the star-filled sky. In the ship's command center, Lydia settled into the captain's chair with a contented sigh. Shadow hovered nearby, exploring the vessel's systems with curious tendrils. "Where to first?" Lydia asked, bringing up the star charts on the main display. Shadow extended a tendril toward a region of space far beyond Zentharian territory, an area marked simply as unexplored on the Empire's charts. Lydia laughed. Always the adventurer. Unexplored it is. As the vessel accelerated toward its destination, Lydia reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A chance encounter in a remote research station had led to an unprecedented partnership between species, challenging the fundamental assumptions of an ancient empire. The Zentharians had built their civilization on the belief that knowledge was power, that understanding came through observation and classification. They had created vast archives of information, but had failed to grasp the most important lessons about connection, compassion, and the power of emotional bonds. In the aftermath of the Void Stalker incident, the Zentharian Empire would be forced to reevaluate its understanding of intelligence, of predator-prey relationships, of the very nature of consciousness itself. Their neat categories had been disrupted, their assumptions challenged, their defenses proven inadequate against a force they had failed to truly comprehend. And somewhere in the vast emptiness of space, a human and a Void Stalker, two beings that by all conventional wisdom should have been enemies, journeyed together as partners, equals, and friends, seeking new knowledge and new connections in the endless frontier of the unknown. The Supreme Coordinator stood on the observation deck of the government complex, watching the stars long after Lydia's vessel had disappeared from sight. Beside him, the Empire's foremost xenobiologist waited patiently for his thoughts. "We must revise our understanding," the Supreme Coordinator finally said. 3 millennia of knowledge, and we failed to recognize the power of what the humans call emotional intelligence. We dismissed it as primitive, as inefficient. Yet it formed a bond strong enough to motivate a Void Stalker to challenge an entire empire, observed the xenobiologist. Strong enough to make a predator protect rather than consume. "And what other lessons might we have missed?" mused the Supreme Coordinator. "What other forces in this universe have we failed to recognize because they didn't fit our categories, our methods of observation?" They fell silent, contemplating the vastness of space and the limitations of even the most advanced civilization's understanding. After a while, the Supreme Coordinator turned away from the viewport. "Update our educational protocols," he instructed. "All future observers must be trained to recognize and analyze emotional interactions, not merely dismiss them as irrelevant data, and expand our research into human psychology. Their apparent weakness may conceal strengths we have yet to comprehend." As the Supreme Coordinator departed, the xenobiologist remained at the viewport, thinking of the human and the Void Stalker journeying together into the unknown. She wondered what discoveries they would make, what bonds they would form with other species, what lessons they might learn that the Zentharian Empire, for all its accumulated knowledge, had never even thought to seek. The stars seemed different somehow, the darkness between them not empty, but filled with possibilities beyond the Empire's careful categorization. For the first time in her long career, the xenobiologist found herself wondering not what the Empire could learn about the universe, but what the universe might yet teach the Empire.